I received some emails asking for more samples of interpretive claims that you could make about fertility myths. So in this mini lesson, I'll share some sample interpretive claims that you can make about the Egyptian myth about Osiris, the Hittite myth about Telepinu, the Norse myth about Balder, and the Chinese myth about Chai Li. First, let's talk about the interpretive claims related to the three common themes in fertility myths that I shared back in mini lesson 4. An interpretive claim that I can make about the Egyptian myth of Osiris, Isis, and Horus, which starts on page 12 of Donna Rosenberg's World Mythology, an anthology of the great myths and legends, is that it is an example of the first of those three common themes. So I could claim that the Egyptian myth of Osiris, Isis, and Horus illustrates a common theme of fertility myths because a god teaches agricultural skills to humans. And an interpretive claim that I can make about the Hittite myth of Telepinu, which starts on page 22 of Rosenberg's World Mythology, is that it is an example of the second of those three common themes. So I could claim that the Hittite myth of Telepinu illustrates a common theme of fertility myths because in order to restore fertility, a god who has been insulted must be appeased. And an interpretive claim that I can make about the Chinese myth of Chai Li slays the serpent, which begins on page 330 of World Mythology, is that it is an example of the third of those three common themes. So I could claim that the Chinese myth, Chai Li slays the serpent, illustrates a common theme of fertility myths because in order to restore fertility, a monster who has destroyed it must be defeated. Of course, you can also make interpretive claims related to fertility myths that are not based on those three common themes. For example, here are two additional claims I can make about the meaning of an aspect of the Egyptian myth Osiris, Isis, and Horus. I could make the claim that the god Osiris is born, dies, and is reborn. The river Nile floods, dries, and floods. So the death of Osiris could be interpreted to symbolize the death of crops irrigated by the waters of the Nile. Or I could make the claim that the god Osiris represents the fertile farmland and the god Set represents the sterile desert. So Set's repeated attempts to kill Osiris could be interpreted to symbolize the ancient Egyptians' fears that the sterile desert would destroy the fertile farmland. As another example, here's a claim I can make about the meaning of the Norse myth of Balder. There are two versions of the myth included in your readings for Module 2, Rosenberg's The Death of Balder, which starts on page 467 of World Mythology, and Sturluson's When the Aesir First Tried to Speak, All They Could Do Was Weep, which is saved as a PDF on our Canvas site for English 245. Because the story of Balder's death and rebirth takes the form of a fertility myth, it could be interpreted to mirror the change of seasons from winter, death, to spring, rebirth. This is suggested by the association of Balder's return to life with springtime imagery. As a final example, here's a claim I can make about the meaning of the Chinese myth Chai Li slays the serpent. The attempt of the people to appease the serpent with the sacrifice of a maiden illustrates that this society associated the fertility of the earth with the fertility of a woman. This last theme, by the way, could have almost made it onto my earlier list of common themes in fertility myths. Chai Li slays the serpent is not the only myth in which the fertility of the earth is connected to the fertility of a woman. That is because, in order to survive, a society must produce both food, associated with the fertility of the earth, and children, associated with the fertility of the women of that society. Notice that in Chai Li slays the serpent, it is specifically a younger maiden, as opposed to an older maid who is sought as a sacrifice. These younger maidens would have been assumed to be more likely to be fertile. Hopefully, these sample interpretive claims you can make about fertility myths will help you to create your contribution to our next discussion in Module 2 of English 245.